I was standing in front of the mirror, adjusting the lace sleeves of my wedding dress when my phone buzzed on the vanity table. At first, I thought it was just another congratulations text or a nervous bridesmaid checking in, but the name on the screen froze me. It wasn't a friend. It wasn't family. It was someone I barely knew, yet the words they sent would tear my world apart. My fingers shook as I unlocked the phone. The screen blurred for a second, not because of the pixels, but because my eyes were already filling with tears. You should know what your fiancé and his mother are saying about you. Beneath that message were screenshots, ugly, undeniable evidence. My fiancé and his mother laughing together, mocking me, calling me a liability, and joking about how I had failed her little gold digger test. I read the words over and over, each one carving into me like a knife. My chest tightened, my stomach churned, and my entire body went cold. The sound of laughter from the hallway suddenly felt like mockery, like the whole world was in on their cruel little game except me. And the worst part? My fiancé didn't defend me. Not once. In those messages, he was right there, agreeing with her, letting her paint me as shallow, unworthy, and pathetic. The man who had looked me in the eyes just last night and promised to protect me forever was silently handing me over to his mother's judgment. I stared at my reflection, veil pinned just right, bouquet waiting by the door, and wondered how I could possibly marry a man who betrayed me before we even said, "I do." My heartbeat pounded in my ears so loudly it drowned out the chatter outside. I wanted to scream, but all that came out was a broken laugh, the kind you let out when life slaps you so hard you can't even cry. The wedding was hours away. The guests were probably already taking their seats, and there I was, sitting in my dress, mascara smudging down my cheeks, realizing that everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and family was a lie. But before I tell you what I decided to do that day, and trust me, it shocked everyone, you need to understand how I got here. Because this wasn't some sudden betrayal. No, this storm had been building for months, and I had ignored every warning sign. When I first met Daniel, my fiancé, I thought I had stumbled into the kind of love story people only dream about. He was charming, attentive, the kind of man who pulled out chairs and remembered how I liked my coffee. We met at a mutual friend's dinner party, and from the start, he seemed too good to be true. And maybe, just maybe, that should have been my first red flag. But the real storm didn't come from Daniel himself. It came from his mother, Eleanor. From the very first handshake, she looked at me like I was a puzzle she didn't want to solve. You know the type of look I'm talking about. That thin smile stretched across her face, eyes scanning me up and down, silently measuring if I was worthy. Spoiler. In her mind, I never was. Eleanor made it clear early on that no woman would ever be good enough for her son. She had this way of slipping insults into compliments, sugarcoating poison with politeness. If I wore a new dress, she'd smile and say, "Oh, you look nice," though that color is more forgiving on slimmer figures. If I brought a dish to family dinner, she'd say, "Interesting recipe, but Daniel prefers it the way I make it." Every interaction was a subtle reminder. She was the queen of that castle, and I was just trespassing. At first, I laughed it off. I told myself it was nerves, generational differences, the usual tension between a mother and the woman taking her son away. But over time, the jabs got sharper, and Daniel's silence got louder. He never defended me. He'd just sit there, maybe squeeze my hand under the table as if that was enough. But let me tell you something. Silence in the face of disrespect is not love. It's complicity. And yet, like so many women in love, I ignored the signs. I convinced myself that once Eleanor got to know me, she'd come around. I thought patience, kindness, and time would win her over. Looking back, I realized I was trying to plant flowers in soil that was never meant to grow anything. What I didn't know then was that Eleanor wasn't just judging me silently. She was already plotting a way to prove I wasn't worthy of her son. And Daniel, the man I thought was my partner, would soon show me just how much control his mother really had over him. Things really took a turn the first time Eleanor decided to test me. She had always treated our relationship like it was some kind of competition, me versus her for Daniel's loyalty. But instead of competing fairly, she resorted to schemes. It started with comments about money. "You know, Daniel has always been generous," she'd say in front of me, her eyes fixed like a hawk. "Some women take advantage of that. I just hope you're not one of them." I'd laugh nervously, trying to brush it off, but inside I felt small, cornered, like I was on trial for a crime I hadn't committed. Then came the infamous allowance scheme. Eleanor suggested, no, demanded, that Daniel put me on a strict budget to see how I'd handle it. She framed it like it was a playful experiment, almost a joke. If she's really in this for love, she won't mind living modestly for a while, she said, smirking as though she'd cracked some clever code. What shocked me wasn't her suggestion. It was Daniel's response. He actually went along with it. He didn't say, "Mom, that's ridiculous," or, "I trust her." Instead, he sat there nodding as if this was perfectly reasonable. The man I thought would be my protector turned into his mother's puppet right before my eyes. Suddenly, I was living under a microscope. Every purchase, every decision, was another chance for Eleanor to judge me. If I bought groceries, she'd say, "Why the name brand cereal? Generic is cheaper." If I treated myself to a coffee, she'd whisper, "See, she's careless with money." No matter what I did, the narrative was already written. I was the gold digger, and she was the gatekeeper of Daniel's wallet. And Daniel? He stayed silent, always silent. His silence felt heavier than her words, because it meant he agreed, or at least didn't care enough to disagree. That's when the cracks in our relationship stopped being invisible. I started asking myself hard questions at night. If he can't defend me now, how will he protect me when things get harder? If his mother controls him now, will she ever stop? But instead of leaving, I stayed. I told myself love conquers all. What I didn't realize was that by staying, I was giving Eleanor more room to twist the knife. And soon, she'd twist it so deep that even Daniel couldn't hide his part in it anymore. The night before the wedding, I should have been floating on air, excited, nervous, maybe even blissfully distracted by last-minute details. Instead, my gut was in knots. Something about Daniel's calmness felt off, almost rehearsed, like he was playing a role rather than living a moment. I brushed it off as pre-wedding jitters, but deep down my instincts were screaming. That's when the message came. A stranger, someone who clearly didn't like Eleanor but had access to the family group chat, sent me screenshots. And there it was, undeniable proof. Daniel and his mother laughing about how I had failed the gold digger test, how Eleanor had been right about me all along. They weren't just mocking me, they were planning to keep me in line, even after the wedding. Reading those words was like watching a glass shatter in slow motion. My future husband wasn't just passively allowing his mother to disrespect me, he was actively playing along. He was supposed to be my partner, the man promising to cherish and protect me. And yet, here he was conspiring with the very person who wanted to tear me down. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed in my bridal suite, phone clutched so tight my knuckles went white. Outside the window, I could hear music drifting up from the rehearsal dinner below. Laughter, clinking glasses, voices celebrating a union that was already broken. And all I could think was, do I really go through with this? Do I stand in front of everyone tomorrow and marry a man who betrayed me before we even began? For the first time in months, I stopped making excuses for Daniel. The veil was lifted, pun intended, and I saw the truth. I was about to marry a man who didn't respect me, who couldn't stand up to his mother, and who thought I would never find out. But I had found out, and that knowledge gave me power. Still, knowing the truth and acting on it are two very different things. The next morning, I would have to make a choice in front of everyone, family, friends, even Eleanor herself. Would I go through with the wedding, pretending I hadn't seen those messages? Or would I finally put myself first, no matter the cost? On the morning of the wedding, I woke up with swollen eyes from crying, but a strange calm in my chest. It was the kind of calm that comes when you've already made the hardest decision. You just haven't spoken it aloud yet. I slipped into my gown, let the hairdresser pin my curls, and smiled when the bridesmaids fussed over the veil. Outwardly, I looked like every glowing bride, but inside I was already gone. The ceremony hadn't started, and yet the marriage was already over. When I finally walked into the bridal room where Daniel was waiting for our first look, I held the phone in my hand. He turned around, his face lighting up as if nothing was wrong. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply handed him the phone. The screen lit up with his own words. The jokes, the cruelty, the complicity. I'll never forget the way his smile collapsed. He opened his mouth, searching for excuses, but I cut him off. My voice was steady, almost too calm. If you can betray me with your mother before we even marry, what chance do we have? I deserve better than this circus. I walked away before he could answer. Past the stunned bridesmaids, past the shocked family members, out into the cool morning air that felt sharper and freer than any vow I could have spoken. Guests whispered. Eleanor fumed. Daniel stammered excuses. But for the first time in a long time, I felt weightless. In the weeks that followed, I didn't just survive. I rebuilt. I found a small apartment, decorated it exactly the way I wanted, without Eleanor's shadow looming over me. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected while bending myself into knots to please people who never cared for me. And slowly, I started to feel like myself again. Leaving Daniel wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of reclaiming my voice, my independence, my dignity. And let me tell you, there's a strange beauty in starting over. When you've been stripped bare by betrayal, you learn how strong your roots really are. But while I was moving forward, Eleanor and Daniel's world was about to crumble in ways they hadn't anticipated. And that's where karma finally stepped in. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. Daniel, once so confident, found himself suddenly isolated. His friends noticed the tension, the forced smiles, the way he avoided talking about the wedding fiasco. Word got around that the bride had walked out, not over some petty argument, but because of betrayal and manipulation. Daniel's credibility, his perfect groom image, began to unravel. Eleanor, on the other hand, faced a reality she hadn't anticipated. Her attempts to control, to manipulate, to prove her point had backfired spectacularly. Suddenly, she wasn't the clever, respected matriarch. She was the meddling mother who had pushed her son into losing the woman he supposedly loved. Family members whispered behind her back, and even Daniel started questioning her motives. For someone who thrived on influence, that loss of control was brutal. Meanwhile, I was thriving in my own space, free from judgment, free from constant oversight. Watching Daniel and Eleanor scramble to justify their actions from afar, I felt no gloating, only quiet vindication. It wasn't revenge. It was simply the natural consequences of their choices catching up with them. They had built a house of cards on suspicion and control, and it collapsed. Interestingly, the aftermath was also a lesson in self-reflection for those around them. Mutual friends reached out to express support, subtly reinforcing that loyalty and trust are earned, not demanded. Daniel learned, albeit slowly, that no one else's perspective, least of all his mother's, should override respect for the partner you choose. Eleanor, meanwhile, had to confront the fact that meddling under the guise of protection often leaves more damage than good. By the time the dust settled, I had moved fully into my new life. My apartment was filled with laughter, friends, and plans for the future. Everything Daniel and Eleanor had tried to control, I had cultivated freely. And as I watched them deal with the fallout of their choices, I realized something profound. Sometimes, the best justice isn't fought for. It simply happens. Life has a way of balancing itself when you refuse to compromise your integrity. Sitting in my new apartment, coffee in hand, I often think about how differently life could have turned out. For years, I had bent myself into shapes I didn't recognize to please people who didn't respect me. I had questioned my worth, my instincts, even my judgment, all because someone else tried to define me by fear and suspicion. But walking away changed everything. I learned that standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's survival. It's about protecting your dignity, your peace, and your future. I'm not the same person who once felt trapped under the weight of someone else's control. I'm stronger, wiser, and more certain of my boundaries than ever before. I still think about Daniel and Eleanor sometimes, not with anger but with clarity. They taught me an unexpected lesson. Trust is fragile and control is a trap. You can't force loyalty or respect. You can only demand it by standing firm in who you are. The best revenge isn't retaliation. It's living well, unapologetically and fully. My friends have noticed the change. They see the confidence in my posture, the way I smile without hesitation, the way I make decisions without seeking permission. My sister Emmy visits often, joking that I've become a budgeting ninja, who also happens to be remarkably independent. The irony isn't lost on me. 3 months ago I was being tested like a child, and now I manage my life with complete autonomy. Life isn't perfect and some days are harder than others, but every step I take in my own space, every dollar I spend without justification, every quiet evening knowing I answer only to myself is a victory. I've realized that freedom isn't about wealth. It's about respect, trust, and the courage to walk away from those who would deny it. And so, as the sun sets over my little apartment, I finally feel what I've been searching for all along: peace. The past is behind me, the lessons are within me, and the future, bright, untethered, and mine, is ahead.